In Explain 1 from your textbook, they go over all the different sampling methods that we can go over. So we're going to just review a few of those right now. So the first one we're going to review is the simple random sample method, where each individual in a population has an equal chance of being selected. So it's pretty much just me picking certain, let's say, people from a group. Just everyone has an equal chance of being selected, much like sometimes you probably get phone calls about surveys, asking questions. That's kind of how they choose you. Self-selected sample are when we ask individuals to volunteer to be a part of that sample. Now sometimes that could be a little biased because well, not everybody wants to answer, surveys on a phone or wants to participate in kind of a sample. So you might get a little bit of a bias or not a full picture of what the actual population is. There's also something called the convenient sample, where individuals are selected based on how accessible they are. So like, let's say I just go to a Walmart and just kind of start asking people outside, hey, what do you think about this? I'm not picking them because everybody in a certain city or certain state has equal chance of being selected. It's more of just like, they're there, you're there. It's convenient, right? So out of these three, this one will probably be the most unbiased, just so you know, because everyone has an equal chance. Whereas these ones have their own biases because here I'm asking for volunteers. Here it's just, they're there, they're accessible. The last three, systematic sample, is where members of a sample are chosen according to a rule, such as the nth individual in a population. So for example, let's say I ask the fourth person who exits a store. So I'm not going to ask everybody, but I'm just going to ask, the fourth person that I see that exits the store. That would be an example of systematic sample. Last two, stratified sample. The population is divided into groups, and individuals from each group are selected. Again, typically random. So let's say we had a group of, like teachers from Anaheim versus teachers from Downey versus teachers from an LA site versus teachers from, different sites. So they're kind of divided by groups. And the last but not least is the cluster sample, where population is divided again into groups. Some of these groups are randomly selected. Either all the individuals in the selected group are selected, or just some individuals from the selected group are selected. So it's pretty much where we break them into groups, and sometimes we'll just skip groups altogether, as it says here, and sometimes we'll select just individuals from certain groups. So keep this in mind as we go into example 1 of Explain 1, okay? So let's go ahead and see it. All right, so example 1 says, identify the population, classify the sampling methods, and decide whether the sampling methods could result in a biased sample. Explain your reasoning. All right, so it says letter A, the officials of the National Football League, NFL, want to know how the players feel about some proposed changes to the NFL rules. They decide to ask a sample of 100 players. Okay. First thing they do is they say the officials choose the first 100 players who volunteer their opinions. So first things first, let's identify our population. Population would be all NFL players. Okay, that's what we're choosing from. We're going to classify a sampling method. Now, they're going to ask the first 100 players that volunteer. Alright, so looking back at our list, we're going to look for which of the methods that we saw was the volunteer method. So here, we'll see here that, individuals who volunteer to be a part of a sample. That's the self-selected sample. So let's go ahead and kind of put that in. So that would be the self-selected sample. The reason we chose that is because they're asking for volunteer players to give opinion, to give their opinion. Okay. Now, why would this be, is this likely or not likely to be biased? Well, this probably would be a little biased. This probably is biased just because you don't know the first 100 players who volunteer. Maybe they won't tell kind of the truth about how they really feel about the rule. Or maybe they will tell the truth, and what if that's not kind of what the other players feel? You never know. Okay, so let's try letter B. They say, okay, well, the officials randomly choose 3 or 4 players from each of the 32 NFL teams. So here, they're kind of breaking this up into groups. Okay, and they're choosing about 3 to 4 players from each group. So again, let's go ahead and go back to our table. So because they chose to do groups, so when the population is divided into groups and individuals from each group are selected, which is essentially what they were doing for letter B. So that would be a stratified sample. Because they're breaking them into groups. And they're going to take from each group. Okay. Would this be biased or not? Well, this is not likely to be biased, and it's not likely to be biased just because each member of the team will have a likely chance of being selected, or have an even chance of being selected. Okay. On the last one, it says for part C, officials have a computer randomly generate a list of 100 players from the database of NFL players. So they're not going to break them into groups. They're just going to simply just put all their names in the computer and just have the computer generate just random 100 players. Okay. And then going back to our, sorry about that, 100 players, random, right? That's kind of giving us a hint that this is actually going to be a simple random sample because, well, they're randomly selecting names. Okay. This would not likely be biased because, again, each team member from the NFL has an equal chance of being selected. Okay, let's go ahead and go on to part B. So it says administrators at a school want to know if students think that more vegetarian items should be added to the menu. So first of all, they want to ask all the students, so not NFL players, but students at the school. Okay. The administrator surveys every 25th student who enters the cafeteria. Now remember, if we're doing every 25th, or every 5th, or every 4th, or every 10th student, this is going to be a systematic sample. And that's because, again, they use a rule of every 25th student. Now let's think about this. Would this method likely result in a biased sample? Well, it wouldn't. And that's because essentially we have a wide range of students to choose from. So let's go on to part B. It says the administrator decides that they're going to just survey the first 50 students who get in line. So this would be more about convenience, because it's the first 50 who get in that line. And I don't know about anybody, but if you've ever gone into a lunch line, it's very select few who always get to the line first. Sometimes it's whoever's closest, but it's essentially the students who are just easily accessible or easily there, right? And this method actually is likely to be biased because not every student has an equal chance of being selected. So what if, you know, as a student, I remember having a couple classes that were really far away from the lunch line, so I was never first. If I would be lucky if I actually got in line at all. So just keep that in mind. Not every student has equal chance of being selected. And then last but not least, letter C. It said the administrators use a randomly generated list of 50 students from a master list of all students. So there's that word randomly. That's our hint that it is going to be a simple random sample. And that's because that list is randomly generated. Okay? This method, again, is not likely to result in a biased sample because, again, each student has a chance, has an equal chance of being selected. All right, just like it says here, stop and do the problems in your packet. Go ahead and do so right now for Explain 1 in 22.1.